Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, stepped into Stanford University's Memorial Auditorium on a crisp evening in March 2025, and something absolutely astonishing was about to unfold. Something so incredible, so jaw-dropping, it would leave the entire room stunned and spark a firestorm of reactions across the nation. The air buzzed with electric tension, thick with anticipation, as every seat in the grand hall was claimed, and dozens of students lined the walls, straining to catch a glimpse of what promised to be the greatest debate Showdown ever witnessed on campus. For weeks, whispers had swirled around this event, an intellectual cage match between Barron Trump, a rising conservative star known for his razor-sharp mind, and Maya Thompson, a fiery liberal activist with a reputation for tearing apart opponents with her passionate pleas. What happened that night would become legendary, a moment so charged with drama that it would ripple far beyond the ivy-covered walls of Stanford. The auditorium itself seemed to pulse with energy, a sprawling space with towering ceilings and rows of seats packed with students from every corner of the ideological spectrum. On one side, supporters of Barron wore red hats emblazoned with slogans like "Keep America Great," their faces lit with quiet confidence. On the other, Maya's backers stood out with their bold, "Eat the Rich" shirts and vibrant, rainbow-colored accessories that matched her own signature hairstyle. The crowd was a living, breathing divide, half ready to cheer for capitalism's defender, half poised to rally behind a progressive crusader determined to dismantle it. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The topic, "Is capitalism still the best economic system for America?" was a powder keg, a question that cut to the core of every political argument raging across the country. Economic uncertainty loomed large in 2025, with inflation climbing, wealth gaps widening, and students desperate for answers about their futures. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of a generation. Barron Trump entered the spotlight with a calm that belied his 20-something years. Tall, poised, and dressed in a tailored navy suit, he carried himself with an air of understated authority. For most of his life, he'd stayed out of the political fray, a quiet figure overshadowed by his father's bombastic legacy. But in the past year, something had shifted. He'd begun stepping into the public eye, surprising everyone with his cool-headed logic and a methodical style that dismantled opponents without ever raising his voice. His supporters saw him as a new conservative titan, articulate, composed, and armed with facts that cut through emotional noise like a blade. Whispers had already begun to spread. This kid's got something special. Tonight would be his biggest test yet, a chance to prove he could stand toe-to-toe with a campus legend and walk away victorious. Maya Thompson, his opponent, was no less formidable. A senior political science major and the outspoken president of Stanford's Progressive Student Alliance, she strode onto the stage with the confidence of someone who'd spent years commanding attention. Her rainbow-streaked hair caught the light as she adjusted her microphone, her black blazer sharp over a t-shirt that screamed "People over Profits." Maya was a force of nature, known across campus for leading fiery protests against corporate greed, climate inaction, and soaring tuition costs. Her speeches could ignite a crowd, her words dripping with passion as she railed against the injustices of the world. To her supporters, she was a future icon, a fearless advocate for the marginalized who wasn't afraid to take on anyone, even a Trump. She'd come prepared to expose Barron as a privileged heir defending a broken system, and she had no intention of holding back. The tension in the room thickened as the clock struck 7:00 p.m. Dr. Evelyn Harris, a stern political science professor with a no-nonsense reputation, took her place as moderator. Her presence alone demanded respect. She'd made it clear in interviews that she wouldn't tolerate chaos or theatrics. Adjusting her glasses, she surveyed the restless crowd before speaking in a voice that sliced through the murmurs. She welcomed everyone to a night that would tackle one of the most pressing questions of our time: the role of capitalism in an America grappling with economic upheaval. The audience hushed, hanging on her every word as she introduced the debaters. Barron would argue for capitalism's enduring value, while Maya would contend it was a relic that needed to be scrapped for something fairer. The rules were simple: 5-minute opening statements, followed by rebuttals, cross-examinations, and closing remarks. The stage was set, the players in position, and the crowd braced itself for what was about to unfold. Maya stepped forward first, her eyes blazing with determination. She gripped the podium, her voice steady but charged with emotion as she launched into her opening salvo. This wasn't just about theories, she insisted. It was about real people, real lives torn apart by a system that favored the few over the many. She painted a vivid picture of Americans struggling to pay rent, juggling multiple jobs, forced to choose between groceries and medicine while billionaires raked in obscene profits. Her supporters erupted in scattered applause, their cheers fueling her fire. She pressed on, dismantling the myth of the American dream with a fervor that reverberated through the hall. Hard work was supposed to lead to success, she argued, but millions were drowning in debt while the richest 1% hoarded more wealth than half the country combined. The left side of the room roared, swept up in her righteous indignation as she branded capitalism, a rigged game designed to keep the masses in chains. Barron stood still, hands folded, his face a mask of calm as Maya's words echoed around him. He didn't flinch, didn't smirk, just waited. When Dr. Harris nodded in his direction, he approached the microphone with deliberate steps, pausing briefly before speaking in a tone so even it seemed to steady the room itself. Maya's argument was emotional, he began, but emotion alone couldn't solve economic problems. Facts could. The right side of the audience clapped, sensing the shift. Capitalism wasn't perfect, he admitted, but it had proven itself the most effective system for lifting people out of poverty. He challenged the crowd to look at the data, to compare free market nations with socialist ones and see the stark difference. Then came the line that would set the night ablaze. If capitalism was such a failure, why did millions risk everything to reach America's shores? Murmurs rippled through the room, even among Maya's supporters, as heads tilted and eyes narrowed. Something big was brewing, and the real fireworks were only just beginning. The Memorial Auditorium at Stanford University had transformed into a battleground, its air crackling with the raw energy of two brilliant minds locked in combat. Barron Trump had just thrown down a gauntlet with his opening statement, daring the crowd to question why immigrants flocked to America if capitalism was the monster Maya claimed it to be. The question lingered like smoke, curling into every corner of the room, and for a fleeting moment, even the most ardent progressives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya Thompson, however, wasn't about to let Barron's calm logic steal her momentum. She stepped forward, gripping the podium with white-knuckled intensity, her rainbow hair catching the stage lights as she fired back with a ferocity that shook the walls. This was no longer a debate, it was war, and she was ready to fight dirty. Maya's rebuttal hit like a thunderclap. People didn't come to America because capitalism was some shining beacon, she snapped. They came because they had no other choice, fleeing war, violence, and collapsing economies often wrecked by American corporations chasing profit. Her voice rose, sharp and accusing, as she turned Barron's own argument against him. Capitalism wasn't a savior, it was an exploiter, a system that preyed on the desperate and dressed it up as opportunity. The left side of the auditorium exploded in cheers, students leaping to their feet as her words struck a chord. She didn't stop there. She hurled data at Barron like grenades. The top 1% owned more wealth than the entire middle class. Wages had flatlined for decades while living costs soared, and CEOs raked in 300 times what their workers earned. This wasn't freedom, she declared, it was oppression, plain and simple. The crowd fed off her energy, her sweeping gestures and dramatic pauses pulling them deeper into her narrative. She pivoted to the planet itself, accusing capitalism of prioritizing profit over survival. Climate change was accelerating, she warned, because billion-dollar industries refused to slow their destruction. Teachers, nurses, factory workers, the people who kept society running, were left to drown while the elite soared higher on their piles of gold. Applause thundered from her supporters, their voices a tidal wave of agreement. Maya lifted her chin, her confidence surging as she scanned the room, certain she'd landed a devastating blow. She'd come to bury Barron Trump under the weight of her righteous fury, and for a moment, it seemed like she might just succeed. But Barron didn't blink. He stood there, cool as ice, waiting his turn with a patience that unnerved even his detractors. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade, calm, measured, and lethal. He began by dismantling Maya's barrage piece by piece. She blamed capitalism for every ill, he said, but what was her alternative? Socialism, communism. He listed off the failures one by one: Venezuela, Cuba, the Soviet Union, each name a quiet indictment of her position. Murmurs stirred as some of Maya's supporters frowned, sensing the ground shift beneath them. Income inequality existed, he conceded, but so did upward mobility. He rattled off examples: Elon Musk arriving penniless, Oprah Winfrey rising from poverty, Jeff Bezos building Amazon from a garage. America thrived because capitalism rewarded innovation, not because it handed out guarantees. The right side of the room clapped louder now, their enthusiasm growing as Barron pressed his advantage. Maya had sneered at the 1%, he noted, but most people in that very auditorium lived better than 90% of the world. The poor in America had smartphones, cars, streaming subscriptions. Compare that to socialist nations where poverty meant empty shelves and bread lines. He turned her emotional appeal on its head. If she thought struggling Americans should just be grateful, she'd missed his point entirely. Demonizing capitalism while enjoying its fruits was hypocrisy, he said, and the words landed like a slap. The room hushed, a palpable shift in energy as Maya's smirk faltered. For the first time, she hesitated, her fingers tightening on the podium as Barron's logic began to chip away at her armor. Maya wasn't done, though. She was too stubborn, too fierce to let him take control so easily. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting through the silence with a biting edge. Hypocrisy. She laughed, incredulous. By his logic, she couldn't criticize capitalism unless she'd lived in a socialist state, a ridiculous standard. She doubled down, hammering at the reality of minimum wage workers who couldn't afford rent despite working 40 hours a week, of families on food stamps despite holding multiple jobs. Her supporters rallied, their cheers rising as she painted a vivid, gut-wrenching picture of a system that rewarded the rich and punished the rest. Billionaires didn't create jobs out of kindness, she scoffed. They hoarded wealth, exploiting workers while conservatives spun it as free enterprise. Barron raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her onslaught. Really, he countered. If billionaires were the problem, why did countries with the most of them boast the highest living standards? Socialist states shared wealth until everyone was equally broke, hardly a success story. The right side of the audience erupted again, their applause swelling as Barron seized the rhythm of the debate. He wasn't just answering her, he was dictating the pace, turning her emotional jabs into opportunities to showcase his command of facts. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to pivot. She couldn't let him keep this up. She needed something bigger, something that would hit harder and swing the crowd back to her side. Her next move was a gamble, an emotional gut punch aimed straight at Barron's privilege. She didn't hold back, her voice trembling with controlled fury as she accused him of never knowing struggle. He'd never faced a choice between rent and food, never lost sleep over medical bills. Born into wealth, he had no right to lecture the working class about hard work. The left side of the room roared, shouts of agreement echoing as she fed off their energy. It was personal now, a direct attack meant to rattle him, to expose him as an out-of-touch elitist playing a debate. For a moment, it worked. The crowd buzzed, eyes darting to Barron to see how he'd respond to such a raw, visceral strike. But Barron didn't flinch. He sighed softly, almost as if he'd expected this, then met her gaze with steady eyes. The privilege card, he said, was that all she had. Facts didn't change based on who delivered them. If he'd been born poor and said the same things, would she listen? The question hung there, sharp and unyielding, forcing Maya to pause. He didn't stop. Struggles were real, he acknowledged, but tearing down capitalism wouldn't fix them. History proved government control enriched only the powerful, not the people. The room grew quieter, not out of boredom, but because something was shifting. Maya's jaw tightened, her confidence wavering as Barron turned her attack into a lesson. He wasn't just debating, he was rewriting the narrative, and she was starting to feel the weight of it. The Stanford debate had reached a fever pitch, the Memorial Auditorium a cauldron of clashing ideals and raw emotion. Maya Thompson had just unleashed a blistering personal attack on Barron Trump, accusing him of coasting on privilege while preaching about hard work, a blow meant to knock him off balance and reclaim the crowd's loyalty. Her supporters had erupted, their cheers a wall of sound that seemed to lift her higher, fueling her belief that she could still turn this fight in her favor. But Barron stood there, unshaken, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm she'd tried to unleash. What happened next would shift the entire night. A moment so piercing it would leave Maya reeling, and the audience questioning everything they thought they knew. Barron's response was surgical. He brushed off the privileged jab with a quiet sigh, then fired back with a question that cut deeper than any insult. If capitalism was so oppressive, why did immigrants risk their lives to reach America? The room fell silent, completely, unnaturally still. Maya blinked, her lips parting as if an answer was forming, but nothing came. 1 second stretched into 2, then 3, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Students exchanged glances, some leaning forward, others watching Maya's face for a crack in her armor. The moderator, Dr. Evelyn Harris, shifted in her seat, her neutral mask slipping just enough to show she felt the weight of the moment. Maya swallowed hard, finally managing a response. They came because they were desperate, because America had resources, not because capitalism was some flawless dream. It was a decent recovery, but Barron wasn't letting it slide. He tilted his head slightly, his voice steady as he pressed the point. Desperation drove them here, sure, but why here? If capitalism was the root of all evil, why not flee to socialist havens? They came for a chance, he said, not a handout, a chance only capitalism could offer. The silence deepened, broken only by faint murmurs as his words sank in. Maya inhaled sharply, scrambling to regain her footing. She snapped back that resources, not ideology, drew people here. Venezuela and North Korea were failing because they lacked America's wealth, not because socialism was inherently flawed. But the damage was done. The pause, the hesitation, it had shifted the energy, and Barron knew it. He doubled down, his tone still maddeningly calm. Resources alone didn't build prosperity. Innovation did, freedom did, opportunity did. Capitalism delivered those, while government-heavy systems crumbled under corruption and inefficiency. The right side of the audience clapped, louder now, as heads nodded across the room, even among some who'd started the night on Maya's side. She could feel it slipping away, the confidence she'd carried like a shield now fraying at the edges. She gripped the podium tighter, her mind racing for a counterpunch. She pivoted, accusing Barron of dodging the real issue. How could he defend a system where CEOs made hundreds of times more than workers who couldn't afford health care? Her supporters rallied, their applause a lifeline as she tried to pull the debate back to her turf. Barron didn't miss a beat. CEOs earned big, he said, but forced companies to redistribute wealth and they'd leave, taking jobs with them. The workers she claimed to champion would suffer most. The logic was cold, brutal, and effective. Murmurs spread, not just from his base, but from the undecided students in the middle, the ones who'd come with open minds. Maya's eyes darted to her loudest cheerleaders, the ones who'd been with her from the start. Some had gone quiet, their hands still as they processed Barron's words. She wasn't just losing ground, she was losing them, and the realization hit like a punch to the gut. Desperate to reclaim the narrative, Maya went for broke. She accused Barron of defending a rigged game, a system that let billionaires hoard wealth while the middle class shrank. Her voice cracked with frustration as she demanded to know his solution. Let capitalism run wild, crushing everyone beneath it. The left side cheered, but it was weaker now, less certain. Barron shook his head, his calm unshaken. The answer wasn't to torch the system, he said, it was to fix it. encourage innovation, reward growth, create policies that lifted workers without punishing success. Capitalism didn't promise perfection, but it offered a path up, not a handout from a bloated government. The room absorbed his words, some students scribbling notes, others whispering to neighbors. Maya stepped back, her expression unreadable as the applause came, tentative at first, then stronger, crossing ideological lines. Dr. Harris finally intervened, her voice breaking the spell. She thanked both debaters, signaling the end of the bruising exchange. The crowd clapped, some with enthusiasm, others with hesitation, as if still wrestling with what they'd seen. Maya exhaled, running a hand through her hair as she glanced at Barron. She'd expected arrogance, a smirk of triumph, but he just nodded politely and stepped away. The debate was over, but its echoes were only beginning. As students poured out of the auditorium, phones were already out, clips of that devastating pause, the silence spreading like wildfire online. Twitter lit up with reactions. Barron just crushed her with one question. Maya had passion, but he had facts. The moment Barron had asked about immigrants, and capitalism was dubbed a mic drop, a viral sensation that would define the night. By morning, the debate had exploded into a national obsession. Conservative outlets crowned Barron a master of reason, while liberal pundits scrambled to spin Maya's stumble as a fluke. But the real story wasn't in the partisan noise. It was in the students who'd watched it unfold. As Barron left the hall, a few approached him, not to argue but to ask questions. "I thought capitalism was corrupt, but you've got me rethinking it. How do we regulate it fairly?" "I'm a Democrat, but that was impressive." Maya, watching from a distance, overheard these exchanges. She wasn't furious, she was curious. Barron hadn't humiliated her with cheap shots, he'd forced her to think, to question. And that, more than any applause, was the night's true power. The doors of Stanford University's Memorial Auditorium had barely swung shut behind the last departing student when the debate between Barron Trump and Maya Thompson erupted into something far bigger than anyone could have predicted. What had begun as a campus showdown on a chilly March night in 2025 was now a raging inferno, consuming social media, news feeds, and dinner-table conversations across America. The air outside buzzed with the frenetic energy of students tapping away at their phones, uploading clips of that electrifying moment. The silence, when Barron's simple question about immigrants had left Maya grasping for words. It wasn't just a pause. It was a seismic crack in the foundation of everything she'd built her argument on, and the world was watching it spread. Within hours, the internet became a battlefield. Twitter, or X as it was still called by some, lit up with a torrent of reactions, each post fanning the flames higher. "Barron Trump just dropped the ultimate truth bomb," one user crowed, sharing a shaky video of Maya's hesitation, her eyes wide as the room held its breath. "Liberal tears are flowing tonight." Another clip, zoomed in on Barron's unflinching stare as he delivered his follow-up, racked up thousands of retweets. "This is how you debate, calm, cool, and crushing." Conservatives seized the moment like a victory lap, hailing Barron as a prodigy who dismantled progressive dogma with a single, surgical strike. "He's the future of the right," one pundit declared on a late-night stream, the gleam in his eye matched only by the flood of likes pouring in. But Maya's supporters weren't about to let Barron claim an uncontested win. They rallied with equal ferocity, flooding the platform with counterattacks. She didn't freeze, she was blindsided by a loaded question, one defender insisted, attaching a thread of statistics on corporate exploitation to prove her point. Maya spoke for the people. Barron just parroted rich kid talking points. Another snapped, her words dripping with disdain. The hashtag #MayaFightsBack began trending, her rainbow-haired silhouette a rallying cry for progressives who saw her as a warrior undone not by logic, but by an unfair twist. Clips of her fieriest moments, calling capitalism a rigged game and slamming billionaires for hoarding wealth, circulated alongside the stumble, as if to remind everyone she'd landed blows of her own. Mainstream media dove into the fray, each outlet spinning the night to fit its narrative. Fox News ran a glowing segment titled "Barron Trump Schools Liberal Activist," replaying his immigrant question on a loop while commentators nodded approvingly. CNN countered with a panel dissecting Maya's hesitation, framing it as a momentary lapse rather than a knockout. "She's young, passionate, she'll learn from this," one analyst said, though the tightness in her smile betrayed the scramble to soften the blow. Online, the debate clips spread beyond X to YouTube, TikTok, and Rumble, each platform amplifying the chaos. A 15-second snippet of Barron's "Why do they come here?" line garnered millions of views, overlaid with captions like "Game over" and "Facts don't lie." Meanwhile, Maya's emotional plea about struggling workers found its own audience, resonating with those who felt her raw anger mirrored their own. The undecided students, the quiet majority who'd walked into the auditorium with no firm allegiance, became the real prize in this digital tug-of-war. They weren't posting manifestos or picking sides, they were thinking. As Barron had exited the hall that night, a handful had approached him, their voices low but earnest. "I've always seen capitalism as greedy," one admitted, shoving his hands into his pockets, "but you made me wonder why people still risk everything to get here." Another, a self-proclaimed Democrat, nodded. "I don't love your dad's politics, but that was slick. How do you balance regulation without killing growth?" Barron listened, offering short, thoughtful answers, his calm demeanor unshaken even as the crowd thinned. Maya, lingering near the stage, caught snippets of these exchanges. Her fists clenched, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something new: curiosity, not rage. By sunrise, the debate had metastasized into a cultural juggernaut. Conservative influencers crowned Barron a rising intellectual king, his navy suit and steady gaze plastered across thumbnails promising the moment liberals feared. Liberal channels scrambled to reframe Maya's performance, one YouTuber arguing, "She didn't lose. She was ambushed by a question no one preps for." But the raw numbers told a different story. Barron's clips outpaced Maya's in views and engagement, his immigrant line a lightning rod that refused to fade. On campus, students huddled in dorms and dining halls, replaying the footage on laptops and phones. "Did you see her face?" one laughed, zooming in on Maya's blank stare. "Yeah, but she hit back hard about CEOs," another countered, scrolling through her stats. The debate wasn't just a spectacle, it was a mirror, reflecting the messy, divided soul of a generation. Beyond the partisan noise, something quieter was brewing. Online forums, Reddit threads, Discord servers, even old-school message boards buzzed with discussions that cut deeper than the viral hype. "I've always hated capitalism," one user wrote, "but Barron's right. Why do people come here if it's so bad?" Another replied, "Maya's got a point about inequality, but she didn't answer the alternative. Socialism sounds nice until you look at history." These weren't cheerleaders or trolls. They were people wrestling with ideas, peeling back layers they'd never questioned before. The debate had cracked open a door, and through it poured a flood of doubt, curiosity, and a hunger for answers neither side had fully anticipated. Maya, meanwhile, retreated to her dorm, the weight of the night pressing down like a storm cloud. Her phone buzzed incessantly, texts from friends, DMs from supporters, alerts from news sites begging for a statement. She ignored them all, replaying the debate in her mind. That pause, she couldn't shake it. She had answers for everything else, stats and stories she'd honed over years of activism, but Barron's question had slipped through her defenses like a blade. She wasn't beaten, not yet, but she was rattled. As dawn broke, she grabbed her laptop and started typing, not a rebuttal, not a defense, but something else entirely. She needed to respond, not just to Barron, but to herself. The fight wasn't over, it was evolving, and she was determined to evolve with it. The Stanford debate between Barron Trump and Maya Thompson hadn't just captured the attention of students and internet warriors. It had caught the eye of some of the biggest names in the world, turning a college event into a lightning rod for global commentary. By the next afternoon, March 3, 2025, high-profile figures from tech moguls to media titans were tossing kerosene onto an already blazing fire. Their reactions didn't just amplify the moment. They reshaped it, pulling the clash into a stratosphere where ideas battled for supremacy on a stage far grander than Stanford's auditorium. Barron's cool-headed triumph and Maya's fiery stumble were no longer just a campus story. They were a referendum on everything from economics to human nature itself. Elon Musk, never one to shy away from a hot topic, was among the first to weigh in. The Tesla and SpaceX billionaire retweeted a clip of Barron's immigrant question, adding his own terse commentary. "Facts don't care about feelings." Solid argument, Barron. The post rocketed past 1 million views in hours, Musk's army of followers amplifying it with memes of Barron as a logic warrior and Maya as a deer in headlights. Musk doubled down in a follow-up tweet. "Capitalism isn't perfect, but it's the engine of progress. Socialism stalls out every time." His endorsement wasn't just a nod. It was a megaphone blasting Barron's performance to an audience of millions who saw the young Trump as a kindred spirit to Musk's own unrelenting drive. Joe Rogan jumped in next, dedicating a chunk of his podcast to dissecting the debate with his signature blend of curiosity and bluntness. "That question was brutal, man," he said, leaning into the mic as his guest. A libertarian economist nodded vigorously. "I get what Maya was going for, the passion, the heart, but that pause. That was the moment she realized she didn't have an answer. Debates like that, they strip away the fluff and make you think." Rogan replayed the clip live, chuckling at the tension in the room. Barron didn't just win. He exposed how shaky some of these anti-capitalist arguments are when you push past the talking points. His millions of listeners, a mix of skeptics and seekers, ate it up, flooding comment sections with praise for Barron's composure. Even Bill Maher, a liberal gadfly known for skewering both sides, couldn't resist chiming in on his show. "Look, I'm no fan of the Trumps," he began, smirking at his audience, "but this kid, he's got something. Capitalism isn't perfect, but it's still the best system we've got," and he made that case without breaking a sweat. Maher paused, then jabbed at Maya's side. She came in hot, all fire and fury, but when he hit her with that immigrant line, you could see the wheels stop turning. "Passion's great, but you've got to have answers." His take, grudging respect laced with critique, resonated with his viewers, many of whom weren't ready to crown Barron but couldn't deny he'd landed a hit. The celebrity pylon didn't stop there. Conservative firebrand Ben Shapiro tweeted a rapid-fire analysis. "Barron Trump just gave a masterclass in Debate 101. Stick to facts, stay calm, let your opponent flail." Maya's emotional appeals fell apart under scrutiny. On the flip side, progressive commentator Hassan Piker streamed a fiery rebuttal, packing in front of his camera. "This wasn't a debate, it was a setup," he raged. Barron's question was a cheap trick, and Maya didn't deserve to be ambushed like that. The system's still rotten, and one rich kid's smooth talk doesn't change that. The dueling takes fueled a proxy war online, with fans of each picking apart the debate frame by frame. Back at Stanford, the campus was a pressure cooker. Students who'd witnessed the event live became minor celebrities, mobbed by peers demanding first-hand accounts. "I was in the third row," one bragged in the dining hall, waving his phone with a blurry photo of Barron at the podium. "When Maya froze, you could feel it. Everyone knew something huge just happened." Another, a Maya fan, pushed back. "She didn't freeze, she was thinking. He caught her off guard, but she still owned him on inequality." The argument spilled into lecture halls, where professors found themselves fielding questions about capitalism and socialism instead of their planned syllabi. The debate had hijacked the semester, forcing everyone to pick a side or at least pretend they understood the stakes. Maya, holed up in her dorm, couldn't escape the noise. Her Instagram notifications pinged nonstop, supportive messages from friends, taunts from trolls, and a growing chorus demanding she respond. She scrolled through the celebrity takes, her jaw tightening at Musk's smug tweet, Rogan's blunt dissection, Maher's backhanded compliment. They weren't just analyzing her, they were judging her, reducing her years of activism to a single, faltering moment. But she wasn't ready to retreat. Late that night, she posted a raw, unfiltered response on Instagram. "Debating isn't about winning, it's about growing. I thought I had all the answers, but last night showed me I don't. I still believe in fighting for people, but I'm questioning everything now, even myself. Let's keep talking." The post went viral, splitting her audience between praise for her humility and accusations of surrender. Barron, by contrast, stayed silent. No tweets, no interviews, just a quiet exit from the spotlight as the world dissected his every word. His supporters filled the void, turning him into a memorable folk hero, Barron the Based, the silent slayer. But those who'd spoken to him after the debate knew he wasn't reveling in the hype. He didn't gloat, one student recalled. "I asked him about corporate greed and he just said, 'It's a problem, but the fix isn't tearing everything down.'" He seemed normal. That restraint only fueled his mystique, casting him as a reluctant victor in a war he hadn't sought to start. The debate's reverberations stretched beyond America's borders. International outlets picked up the story. BBC ran a segment on the Trump heirs' debate triumph, while Al Jazeera framed it as young American elites clash over capitalism's future. Clips of Barron's question popped up in WhatsApp groups from London to Lagos, sparking debates in languages neither he nor Maya spoke. It was no longer about two students. It was about the ideas they'd unleashed, ideas now racing across the globe at the speed of a retweet. And somewhere in that chaos, a truth was emerging. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. A week had passed since Barron Trump and Maya Thompson faced off at Stanford, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. They grew louder, sharper, cutting deeper into the fabric of a nation already frayed by division. By March 9, 2025, the debate had transcended its origins, morphing from a viral college event into a full-blown cultural phenomenon that forced everyone, students, workers, pundits, even the apathetic, to confront the questions it raised. The Memorial Auditorium's hallowed walls had contained the initial clash, but now the fight spilled into every corner of American life, a mirror held up to a society wrestling with its past, present, and future. This wasn't just about who won. It was about what people saw when they looked at Barron's calm certainty and Maya's shaken resolve. On the surface, the partisan lines hardened. Conservative media outlets ran victory laps, plastering Barron's face across screens with headlines like, "The Trump legacy lives on," and "Reason prevails over rage." Talk radio hosts dissected his immigrant question like it was a sacred text, praising his unassailable logic while mocking Maya's pause as proof of liberal fragility. "She crumbled because she had nothing," one host sneered, his audience nodding along over their morning coffee. Online, right-wing influencers churned out montages of the debate's greatest hits, Barron's steady voice layered over dramatic music and slow-motion shots of Maya's faltering expression. To them, it was a rout, a humiliating defeat for the woke left at the hands of a young conservative titan. Liberals fought back with equal venom. Progressive blogs and podcasts cast Maya as a martyr, a brave voice ambushed by a cunning foe. Barron's question wasn't brilliant, it was a trap, one writer argued, insisting Maya's silence stemmed from shock, not weakness. They replayed her strongest moments, her searing takedown of billionaire greed, her plea for the working class, urging followers to see past the viral stumble. "She spoke truth to power," a viral TikTok declared, set to somber piano chords as images of struggling families flashed on-screen. Activist groups rallied around her, organizing watch parties to reclaim the narrative, their chants of people over profits echoing her podium cry. To them, Barron was no victor, just a privileged puppet hiding behind rehearsed lines. But beneath the noise, a quieter revolution was stirring. The debate's true impact wasn't in the cheerleading or the mudslinging, it was in the minds it unsettled. Across the country, ordinary people who'd stumbled across the clips began asking questions they'd never voiced before. In a Detroit auto shop, a mechanic wiping grease from his hands watched Barron's argument on his phone during a break. "I've always hated the rich," he muttered to a coworker, "but he's right. Why do people keep coming here?" In a Seattle coffee shop, a barista who'd cheered Maya's protests frowned at her screen. "She's got heart, but what's the fix? I don't want socialism. I just want rent I can afford." These weren't ideologues, they were the exhausted middle, the ones who tuned out politics until that night forced them back in. College campuses became ground zero for this reckoning. At Stanford, students who'd been in the room traded stories like war veterans, their accounts growing mythic with each retelling. "I swear, you could hear a pin drop when she froze," one said, sipping a latte in the quad. "Yeah, but Barron didn't even gloat, he just kept going," another replied, flipping through a textbook. Beyond Palo Alto, dorm rooms from UCLA to NYU buzzed with late-night debates mirroring the original. "Capitalism sucks, but what's better?" one freshman asked, scrolling X for answers. "Maya's right about inequality, but Barron's data, I can't shake it," sighed another, rubbing tired eyes. Professors scrambled to adapt, some ditching lesson plans to dive into the economic theories the debate had unearthed. Maya felt the shift, even from the cocoon of her dorm. Her Instagram post, humble, introspective, had sparked a flood of responses, from diehard fans urging her to keep fighting to skeptics accusing her of folding. She read them all, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she wrestled with what came next. The debate had exposed a gap in her armor, a question she couldn't dodge. If not capitalism, then what? She'd spent years railing against the system, but Barron's challenge had forced her to look beyond anger. She started researching, not to win a rematch, but to understand. Late nights blurred into early mornings as she pored over books on economic history, scribbling notes about Scandinavia's hybrid models and America's Gilded Age. She wasn't abandoning her beliefs, she was sharpening them. Barron, meanwhile, remained an enigma. He'd vanished from the public eye after the debate, leaving his supporters to carry the torch. But those who'd spoken to him that night replayed his words in their heads. "He didn't act like he'd won," one student told a friend over lunch. "I asked about fixing inequality and he said, 'It's real, but you don't fix it by breaking everything.' It stuck with me." His silence only deepened the fascination. Some saw it as arrogance, others as wisdom beyond his years. Rumors swirled. Was he prepping for a political run, writing a book, or just lying low, letting the world argue itself hoarse? Whatever the truth, his absence made the debate's echoes louder, his shadow looming larger with each passing day. The cultural ripples kept spreading. A viral Reddit thread titled "Barron vs. Maya, Who Actually Won?" ballooned to thousands of comments, users dissecting every word, gesture, and pause. "Barron owned the logic, but Maya owned the emotion," one wrote. "She lost the room, but he didn't win hearts," countered another. On TikTok, teens stitched the immigrant question into skits, one pretending to be Maya, stammering comically, another mimicking Barron's cool delivery with exaggerated swagger. Late-night hosts took cracks at it. Barron Trump debated a liberal and won. "Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the Trump tree," one quipped, to groans and laughter. But beyond the memes and mockery, a deeper current flowed. People weren't just laughing, they were thinking. This wasn't about Barron destroying Maya or Maya overcoming a stumble. It wasn't even about capitalism versus socialism. It was about what happened when two opposing worlds collided, not with screams or slogans, but with ideas laid bare. For years, America had drowned in echo chambers, each side shouting past the other. But that night at Stanford had pierced the noise, forcing a reckoning. Students who'd never cared about economics Googled GDP stats. Workers who'd tuned out politics debated over beers. Even Maya, the fiery activist, and Barron, the poised heir, had been changed, pushed to question, to refine, to grow. The debate was over, but its legacy was just beginning, a spark that refused to die in a nation desperate for clarity. 2 weeks after Barron Trump and Maya Thompson clashed at Stanford University, the debate that had electrified Memorial Auditorium on that fateful March night in 2025 was no longer just a fleeting headline. It was a living, breathing force reshaping how people talked, thought, and argued. The viral clips, the celebrity endorsements, the partisan spin, all of it had settled into something more enduring, a conversation that refused to be boxed up and forgotten. Across America, from bustling cities to quiet towns, the questions Barron and Maya had wrestled with were seeping into everyday life, forcing a nation long accustomed to shouting matches to pause and listen. This wasn't about one side crushing the other. It was about the cracks they'd exposed, cracks that demanded answers no one could ignore. On college campuses, the ripple effects were seismic. At Stanford, the debate had become a legend, its details recounted with a mix of awe and exaggeration. Students who'd been there spun tailies over late-night study sessions, their voices hushed as if sharing a secret. "You don't get it," one told a freshman in the library, eyes wide. When Maya froze, it was like time stopped. Barron didn't even blink. Beyond Palo Alto, the impact spread like wildfire. At Ohio State, a political science club hosted an impromptu re-debate, pitting two of their own against each other to mimic the showdown. "Capitalism's messy, but it works," one argued, channeling Barron's cool precision. "It's broken, look at the wealth gap," the other shot back, echoing Maya's fire. The room split down the middle, but instead of fists or insults, they traded stats and sources, a rarity in an age of sound bites. High schools weren't immune either. In a Dallas suburb, a history teacher scrapped her lesson on the New Deal to show the debate footage, her students leaning forward as Barron's immigrant question hit the screen. "Why do people come here?" a sophomore asked, frowning at her notebook. "I thought it was just because we're rich." Her classmate, a quiet kid in a hoodie, piped up. "Maybe it's both freedom and money, but Maya's right about CEOs hoarding it." The discussion stretched past the bell, kids lingering to argue over lunch trays. Teachers nationwide reported similar scenes. Teens who'd once shrugged at politics were suddenly digging into economic theory, Googling terms like upward mobility and wealth inequality between TikTok scrolls. The debate had lit a fuse under a generation raised on apathy. In workplaces, the conversation took a grittier turn. At a Philadelphia steel mill, workers on break huddled around a phone replaying Maya's plea for the struggling class. "She gets it," one grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. "I bust my ass 50 hours a week and still can't save." His buddy nodded, then hesitated. "Yeah, but Barron's got a point. My cousin came from Honduras with nothing, and now he's got a truck and a house. That doesn't happen in Cuba." The debate didn't solve their woes, but it gave them a lens, a way to wrestle with a system they'd long cursed without knowing why. In Silicon Valley offices, techies sipping overpriced lattes debated over Slack. "Barron's data holds up, innovation drives growth," one typed. "Sure, but Maya's right, growth for who?" came the reply. The divide was stark, but the tone was different, less venom, more questions. Online, the discourse evolved beyond the initial frenzy. Reddit threads ballooned into sprawling essays, users citing everything from GDP charts to historical collapses. "Capitalism's lifted billions out of poverty. Look at China post-1978, one argued, linking a study. "Yeah, but it's also crashed economies. 1929-2008, another countered, dropping a documentary clip. On X, a viral thread from an econ professor broke down Barron's immigrant point. "He's right, migration patterns favor market economies, but Maya's not wrong about exploitation. The data's messy." The post racked up thousands of retweets, not for picking a winner, but for wrestling with the gray. Even TikTok, land of fleeting trends, saw a surge of explainer videos, teens in hoodies dissecting wealth gaps or reciting Barron's lines with mock gravitas. The debate had turned armchair critics into amateur scholars. Maya Thompson felt the shift most acutely. She emerged from her dorm after days of silence, her Instagram post a quiet bombshell that had reframed her as a thinker, not a loser. Now she was back in the thick of it, not debating Barron again, but engaging her own side. At a Progressive Student Alliance meeting, she stood before a packed room, her rainbow hair dulled by exhaustion but her voice steady. "I went in thinking I'd bury him," she admitted, "but he forced me to look harder at everything. We can't just scream about what's wrong, we need solutions." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. She started a reading group, Piketty Friedman, even Rand, pushing her peers to dig into the systems they claimed to hate or love. "Barron won the room," she said, "but I'm not done fighting, I'm just fighting smarter." Barron predictably stayed out of sight. No victory tour, no gloating interviews, just silence that somehow made him louder. His absence fueled speculation. Was he plotting a political move, advising his father's next campaign? Students who'd met him after the debate became unofficial spokespeople, repeating his measured takes. He said fixing inequality matters, but you don't do it by breaking what works, one recalled, sipping coffee in the quad. It wasn't preachy, he just said it like it was obvious. Conservative outlets begged for a follow-up, but Barron didn't bite, leaving his performance to speak for itself. That restraint turned him into a myth, a young sage who dropped truth and walked away untouchable. The media couldn't let it go. Cable news ran endless loops, pundits picking apart every word like forensic detectives. Barron's a prodigy, he's got Trump's fire without the noise, a Fox anchor gushed. Maya's stumble doesn't erase her point. Capitalism's flaws are real, a MSNBC host countered. But the real story wasn't on TV, it was in the people tuning out the spin to think for themselves. In a Chicago bar, a bartender overheard two regulars debating over beers. "Barron's right, capitalism's why we've got this place," one said, gesturing at the neon-lit room. "Maybe," the other replied, "but Maya's why I'm pissed my rent's half my paycheck." They didn't agree, but they listened, a small miracle in a polarized age. This new conversation wasn't loud or flashy. It was messy, halting, human. It lived in the questions people asked over kitchen tables, in the notes scribbled during lectures, in the quiet moments of doubt before sleep. Barron and Maya hadn't solved America's problems, but they'd done something rarer. They'd made people care enough to argue, not with fists or insults, but with ideas. The debate had planted a seed, and across the nation it was beginning to sprout, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. The fight wasn't over. It was shifting, and the next round would belong to whoever could turn questions into answers. By mid-March 2025, the Stanford debate between Barron Trump and Maya Thompson had leapt beyond America's borders, its echoes reverberating across oceans and time zones with a force that stunned even the most jaded observers. What had started as a clash in a California auditorium was now a global spectacle, dissected in newsrooms, cafes, and classrooms from London to Tokyo. The world wasn't just watching Barron's cool-headed jab or Maya's fiery unraveling. They were seeing a microcosm of their own struggles, a proxy war for the economic soul of the 21st century. This wasn't a college spat anymore. It was a mirror held up to a planet grappling with wealth, power, and the systems that shaped both. In Europe, the debate landed like a thunderbolt. The BBC aired a primetime special, the Trump heirs debate triumph, framing Barron as a polished foil to his father's bombast. "He's not shouting over people, he's outthinking them," a British analyst remarked, replaying the immigrant question with a raised eyebrow. In Paris, Le Monde ran a front-page story titled "Capitalism Under Fire, An American Reckoning," praising Maya's passion while noting her stumble exposed the fragility of youthful idealism. French students, no strangers to protests, took to X. "Maya's us sick of the rich getting richer," one wrote. "But Barron's logic is hard to argue," another admitted. In Germany, where economic stability was a point of pride, Der Spiegel called it a clash of American extremes, marveling at how two kids could ignite such a firestorm. Asia watched with a mix of fascination and skepticism. In China, where state-controlled media rarely spotlighted Western debates, snippets of the event slipped through on WeChat, sparking hushed discussions. "He's right, people come to America for a chance," one user posted, quickly deleted. "But Maya sees the cracks we hide here," another replied, equally cryptic. Japan's NHK aired a sober analysis, contrasting Barron's defense of markets with their own tightly regulated system. "He speaks like an old soul," a Tokyo professor mused, "but Maya's anger feels familiar. Our youth feel it too." In India, where capitalism's boom had lifted millions yet left millions more behind, NDTV hosted a panel. "Barron's data is solid," one argued, "but Maya's right. Wealth stays at the top." The debate wasn't just entertainment, it was a lens on their own jagged progress. The global South brought rower reactions. In Brazil, where inequality rivaled America's, Globo aired clips with Portuguese subtitles, Maya's plea for workers striking a nerve. "She's speaking for us," a Sao Paulo factory worker told a reporter, but Barron's question, "Why do we dream of the U.S.? That hurts." In Nigeria, Channels TV replayed the silence, a Lagos student tweeting, "Maya froze because she's never had to answer that. We know why we chase America. It's not perfect, but it's better than here." South Africa's Mail and Guardian dubbed it a first world fight with third world echoes, noting how both debaters spoke to universal tensions: opportunity versus fairness, growth versus equity. The world didn't just watch, they wrestled alongside, their own histories coloring every word. International leaders couldn't stay silent. Canada's Justin Trudeau, ever the progressive, tweeted a subtle nod to Maya: "Passion for justice matters, keep pushing." Germany's chancellor, less effusive, praised the clarity of young minds tackling old problems. In Russia, state media spun it as American decadence, mocking both sides, though private Telegram channels buzzed with admiration for Barron's poise. Elon Musk's global fanbase kept the hype alive. His facts over feelings quip retweeted from Sydney to Seoul. Even Pope Francis, in a Vatican address, seemed to weigh in. "Wealth must serve all, not a few," youth remind us to question. Whether he meant Maya or both was unclear, but the faithful debated it for days. Back in America, the global spotlight sharpened the stakes. Stanford students felt it most. Suddenly, their debate was a world stage. "I didn't sign up for this." One of Maya's friends laughed nervously, dodging a BBC reporter in the quad. Maya herself leaned into it, joining a virtual panel with activists from Brazil and India, her voice steadier now. "This isn't just about America," she said. "It's about everywhere capitalism's reach is global, and so are its flaws." Her reading group swelled, international students bringing perspectives she'd never considered: Nordic socialism, Asian tiger economies, African resilience. She wasn't retreating. She was expanding, her fire tempered by a hunger to understand. Barron's silence held firm, but the world filled it for him. A London think tank invited him to speak. He declined. A Tokyo university offered an honorary lecture slot. No reply. His supporters overseas turned him into a symbol. "He's the voice of reason we need," an Australian conservative wrote. "A kid who gets it," a Kenyan entrepreneur echoed. His immigrant question became a global riddle, debated in pubs and parliaments alike. Why did people chase market economies, flaws and all? No one had a clean answer, but the question lingered, a splinter under the skin of every nation watching. Barron didn't need to speak. His shadow was loud enough. The international response wasn't all high-minded. Memes crossed borders, Barron as a stoic samurai, Maya as a faltering boxer, while X erupted with multilingual roasts. "She choked harder than my team in the World Cup," a Spaniard quipped. But beneath the snark, a thread emerged. People everywhere saw themselves in this fight. In Ireland, a Dublin pub hosted a watch and argue night. Pints raised as patrons shouted over Barron's data and Maya's pleas. In Mexico City, a street vendor played the clips on a cracked phone, muttering, "Both are right, works hard, but it's still a chance." The debate had gone global not because it was perfect, but because it was human. Two kids laying bare a tension that spanned continents. This wasn't America's story anymore. It was the world's. From European socialists to African dreamers, from Asian pragmatists to Latin American fighters, the clash had tapped into a universal vein. How do we build a system that works? Barron and Maya hadn't answered it, but they'd asked it louder than anyone in years. The planet leaned in, not for a winner, but for a way forward, proof that a single night could ripple across borders, shaking loose questions too big to contain. 3 weeks into the aftermath of the Stanford debate, Barron Trump and Maya Thompson weren't just names. They were symbols, their clash a crucible for something far larger than a college stage. By late March 2025, the raw energy of that night had hardened into a legacy, one that cast long shadows over their lives, their families, and the systems they dared to challenge. This wasn't about who'd won anymore. It was about what they'd unleashed, a reckoning that tied their fates to forces they couldn't control. The world had watched them battle, but now it watched them live with the consequences, their every move dissected under a microscope neither had asked for. For Barron, the debate was a double-edged sword. He walked away from Memorial Auditorium with the room in his grip, his immigrant question a dagger that had pierced Maya's armor and electrified the crowd. But that victory came with a price. The Trump name, a legacy both gilded and tarnished, now clung to him tighter than ever. Conservative circles buzzed with talk of the heir apparent, pundits on Newsmax and OAN dubbing him Donald too smarter, smoother, unstoppable. Clips of his calm delivery played alongside old footage of his father's brash rants, the contrast fueling a narrative. Barron was the evolution, the refined weapon of a dynasty ready to reclaim its throne. He's got the old man's guts, but none of the chaos. One host grinned, sparking cheers from viewers. Yet Barron himself seemed untouched by the hype. He hadn't spoken publicly since the debate, dodging interviews and campus appearances with a discipline that frustrated his boosters. Sources close to him, few and tight-lipped, hinted he'd return to his studies, spotted in Stanford's library with econ texts and a laptop, headphones blocking out the noise. He's not running for anything, a classmate insisted. He just wanted to make a point. But the Trump machine churned on without him. Rumors swirled of Donald Trump Sr., beaming with pride, reportedly telling aides, "That's my boy, showed him how it's done." Whether Barron wanted it or not, his performance had tethered him to a political legacy that wouldn't let go, a shadow he'd spent years avoiding now inescapable. Maya, meanwhile, bore a different burden. Her stumble had made her a punching bag for detractors. Memes of her frozen face captioned, "When you realize you're wrong," still circulated. But it had also forged her into something stronger. The Progressive Student Alliance rallied around her, their meetings packed with supporters chanting her name. "She didn't lose, she grew," one ally declared, turning her Instagram post into a mantra. But the spotlight burned hotter now. Every word she spoke was parsed for weakness, her activism no longer just a cause but a public trial. "They want me to crack," she told a friend over coffee, her eyes tired but defiant. "I won't." Her legacy wasn't tied to a famous name, but to a movement, one she'd ignited long before Barron stepped into her path. She'd led protests, penned manifestos, built a following that saw her as their voice. The debate hadn't destroyed that, it had amplified it, even as it exposed her limits. She threw herself into research, her dorm a chaos of books and notes, Marx, Keynes, even Barron's beloved free market icons. "I'm not letting him define me," she said at a rally, her rainbow hair catching the sun. He asked a question, I'm finding the answer. Her supporters cheered, but privately she wrestled with doubt, not about her beliefs, but about how to make them stick. The shadow of that night loomed large, a test she hadn't passed but hadn't failed either. Their families felt the weight too. Donald Trump Sr.'s camp reportedly saw Barron's win as a PR coup, aides floating ideas of joint appearances, father and son defending America. Melania, ever protective, stayed silent, though sources said she'd urged Barron to focus on school, not the circus. For Maya, family was less public but no less present. Her parents, a nurse and a teacher from Oakland, called daily, proud but worried. "You're tougher than they know," her mom said, "but don't let them break you." Her younger brother, a high schooler, texted her debate memes with laughing emojis, support in his own way. Neither Barron nor Maya could escape the legacies they carried, personal or political, each step shadowed by who they were and who people wanted them to be. The systems they challenged, capitalism itself, felt the tremors too. Corporate boards didn't lose sleep over a student debate, but the chatter it sparked didn't go unnoticed. In Wall Street bars, traders swapped takes. "Kids write, markets work," one said, sipping a whiskey. "Yeah, but the optics, people hate us," another muttered. Activists like Maya's allies seized the moment, launching petitions for wage hikes and tax reforms, her words their fuel. "CEOs make 300 times more than us. Why?" became a rallying cry, plastered on signs at rallies from New York to LA. Barron's defense, meanwhile, bolstered libertarian think tanks, their reports citing his stats on migration and mobility. The debate hadn't shifted policy, but it had shifted the air. Ideas once academic, now urgent, alive, debated in boardrooms and streets alike. Their peers at Stanford watched it all unfold, caught between awe and unease. "Barron's a ghost now," one student said, "but you can't unsee what he did." Another, a Maya loyalist, nodded. "She's still fighting, he just made her better." The campus split into camps, not red versus blue, but thinkers versus feelers, each side wrestling with the same questions. Off campus, the nation mirrored them. A Gallup poll showed a spike in young adults reconsidering economic views, Barron and Maya credited as the spark. X buzzed with testimonials. "I was a socialist, now I'm not sure," one user wrote. "I hated capitalism, now I'm digging into it," another confessed. The legacy wasn't victory, it was disruption, a crack in the armor of certainty. Barron and Maya didn't meet again, didn't trade barbs or olive branches. But their shadows crossed daily, in headlines, hashtags, hushed debates. He'd forced her to think harder, she'd forced him to prove more. Neither had planned to become icons, but the world had other ideas. Their clash had birthed a legacy not of answers, but of questions, raw, messy, essential. And as April loomed, those questions hung over them, their families, their nation, a weight they'd carry whether they wanted to or not. The stage was empty, but the spotlight stayed on, relentless and unforgiving. A month had passed since Barron Trump and Maya Thompson faced off at Stanford University, but the debate of March 2, 2025, refused to fade into the annals of forgotten news cycles. By early April, its echoes had woven themselves into the fabric of American life and beyond, transforming a single night into a touchstone that redefined how people saw their world, their systems, and themselves. This wasn't just a story of two students dueling over capitalism. It was a saga of ideas unleashed, of certainties shattered, of a generation forced to confront the messy truth beneath their slogans. The Memorial Auditorium stage had been a launchpad, and what it fired into the ether was still burning bright, a flame that refused to gutter out. The nation couldn't stop talking about it. In homes from coast to coast, the debate infiltrated dinner tables and living rooms, sparking arguments that ranged from heated to hesitant. In a Kansas farmhouse, a father and daughter squared off over dessert. "Barron's right, capitalism's why we've got this land," he said, gesturing at the fields beyond the window. "Maybe," she replied, fork paused midair, "but Maya's got a point. Why's it so hard for me to pay off college?" In a Brooklyn apartment, roommates split over beers. "He owned her with facts," one laughed, scrolling X, "facts don't fix my rent," the other snapped, slamming his bottle down. These weren't polished debates, they were raw, real, human, the kind of talks that lingered long after the dishes were cleared or the bar tab paid. Schools became battlegrounds of thought. Elementary teachers in Chicago used simplified versions of the debate to spark discussions. "Why do people work hard?" one asked, her third graders scribbling answers like to buy toys and to help others. High schools pushed deeper. AP economics classes dissected Barron's data, while English teachers had students write essays on Maya's rhetoric. "Her passion moved me," one junior wrote, "but his logic stuck with me." Colleges nationwide hosted forums, some inviting economists to unpack the clash, others letting students duke it out themselves. At UC Berkeley, a packed lecture hall cheered a mock rematch. Maya too fought back with stats on universal healthcare, while Barron Jr. doubled down on market freedom. The original debate had birthed 1,000 echoes, each one testing the same fault lines. Workplaces buzzed with its fallout. In an Atlanta call center, employees on break replayed clips, one muttering, "Barron's why my boss has a yacht and I don't." Another shrugged, "Yeah, but Maya's fix government handouts, rather keep my paycheck." In a Seattle tech firm, engineers debated over ping pong. "Innovation's king, Barron nailed it," one said, smacking the ball. "Sure, but who gets the profits?" his opponent volleyed back. The debate didn't solve their gripes. It gave them a language, a framework to wrestle with a system they lived in but rarely questioned. Even CEOs took note. Fortune 500 memos quietly circulated, urging PR teams to address public sentiment after Maya's 300 times more lines stuck in the zeitgeist. The C-suite didn't panic, but they listened. Online, the conversation morphed into a sprawling beast. X remained ground zero, hashtags like Barron vs. Maya and capitalism debate trending weeks later. A viral thread from a data analyst broke down migration stats. Barron's right, 90% of economic migrants target market economies. Maya's inequality numbers check out too, top 1% own 32% of US wealth. Replies piled up. So they're both right. No, they're both half right. Reddit's r/economics sub swelled with posts. Barron's immigrant paradox explained. Maya's case against CEOs, data dive, each sparking debates that ran hundreds of comments deep. TikTok kept it lighter but no less engaged. A teen in a beanie lip-synced Barron's "Why Do They Come?" with a caption, "Still waiting for an answer." Another stitched Maya's plea with footage of empty wallets. "This is my life." The internet didn't tire, it dug deeper. Maya Thompson rode the wave with grit and grace. She turned her dorm into a war room, stacks of books and sticky notes mapping a new path. Her Instagram evolved, less fiery rants, more thoughtful posts. Reading about Denmark capitalism with a safety net. Thoughts. Followers flooded in, some praising her growth, others demanding she stop waffling. She spoke at rallies, her voice sharper now. Barron asked a question, I'm answering it. We fix what's broken, not burn it down. Her reading group went virtual, drawing students from London to Lagos, their discussions a chaotic blend of accents and ideas. I hated him that night, she confessed in a live stream, but he made me better. Critics called it a cop-out, supporters called it evolution. Either way, she was no longer just a protester, she was a force, her legacy shifting from anger to inquiry. Barron Trump, by contrast, remained a phantom. He hadn't surfaced publicly, leaving Stanford's campus quiet but his imprint loud. Classmates spotted him in lectures, head down, scribbling notes, a student, not a star. He's not milking it, one said, which makes it weirder. He won and he's done. Conservative media begged for more, Newsmax airing a special. Where, Barron, America needs him. Rumors flew, he was writing a manifesto, advising Trump 2028 or just biding his time. His father's camp fueled the fire, Donald Sr., reportedly boasting at Mar-a-Lago, my kid's a genius better than me. Melania, ever the shield, kept him grounded, insiders saying she told him, live your life, not theirs. Barron didn't bend, his silence a wall that turned him into a legend, less a person, more an idea. The world beyond America kept wrestling too. In London, a pub quiz added a round. What did Barron ask Maya? In Mumbai, a street vendor hawked debate 2025 t-shirts, Barron's face on one side, Maya's on the other. South African students staged their own version, one arguing, capitalism built Johannesburg, the other shouting, and left Soweto behind. The Vatican revisited Pope Francis's words, a Jesuit scholar writing, the young Trump defends order, the activist demands justice, both seek truth. Global think tanks churned out papers, migration and markets, a Trumpian view, inequality's toll, Thompson's cry, each citing the debate as a spark. It wasn't a fad, it was a lens, refracting local struggles through a Stanford prism. The systems they challenged felt the strain. Wall Street hosted closed-door talks, public perceptions shifting, how do we respond? One exec asked, eyeing Maya's viral stats. Activist groups inspired by her pushed harder, petitions for a $20 minimum wage gained traction. Her rigged game lined their slogan. Barron's words bolstered free market advocates, a Cato Institute report touting the Trump effect, defending capitalism's core. Policy didn't shift overnight, but the ground rumbled. Lawmakers fielded calls about tax reform. Regulators eyed CEO pay gaps. The debate hadn't rewritten laws, but it had rewritten the playbook. Ideas once dormant now demanded airtime. Stanford itself became a shrine. The auditorium drew visitors, students, tourists, even a documentary crew. It staged a silent witness to history. Plaques weren't hung, but stories were told. This is where she froze, a guide whispered, pointing. And where he won, another added. Maya's peers saw her as a phoenix, rising sharper. Barron's as a sage, vanished but victorious. The campus split lingered, not red versus blue, but head versus heart, logic versus soul. "They changed us," a senior said, "even if they didn't mean to." Polls backed it. A Pew survey found 60% of 18-25-year-olds rethinking economic beliefs, the debate named as the trigger. The long echoes stretched into intangibles. Families talked more awkwardly, earnestly about money, fairness, dreams. Strangers in bars swapped takes, not punches. Kids asked harder questions, adults fumbled for better answers. Barron and Maya hadn't fixed the world, they'd broken it open, exposing a hunger for reason, for justice, for something real. Their clash wasn't a conclusion, it was a beginning, a call to think, to fight, to build. Years later, people would ask, "Where were you when they debated?" And the answers would vary, but the feeling wouldn't. A night when two kids, flawed and fearless, made the world listen. That was the legacy. Not a winner, not a loser, but a question that wouldn't die. A spark that kept burning long after the lights went out. If you enjoyed this story, check out another video with an even more amazing tale. There's always something exciting waiting for you on our channel. And don't forget, more wonderful stories are coming soon. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming adventures.